etc. Right? But then when it says, and supper being ended, now we have moved into what is going to be the Passover. Okay? And supper being ended, the devil having now put into the heart of Yehuda ben Shimon from Keriot, or Judas Iscariot, to betray him. Yahushua, knowing that the Father had given all things into his hands, and that he was come from Elohim, and went to Elohim. He rose from supper and laid aside his garments and took a towel and girded himself. Now from verses 5 to 19, I'm not going to get into all those details. That is the point where the Messiah actually washed the feet of the disciples. Okay? But we want to pick back up in verse 21. When Yahushua had thus said, he was troubled in spirit, and testified and said, Verily, verily, I say unto you, that one of you shall betray me. Then the disciples looked on one another, doubting of whom he spoke. Now there was leaning on Yahushua's bosom one of his disciples, whom Yahushua loved, Shimon Kepha. Therefore beckoned to him, that he should ask who it should be of him whom he spoke. He then, lying on Yahushua's breast, says to him, Adonai, who is it? Yahushua answered, He it is to whom I shall give a sop. When I have dipped, and when he had dipped the sop, he gave it to Yehuda ben Shimon from Keriot. And after the sop, Satan entered into him. Then said Yahushua unto him, That thou doest, do quickly. Now no man at the table knew for what intent he spoke this to him. For some of them thought, because Yehuda had the bag, that Yahushua had said to him, Buy those things that we have need of against the feast, or that he should give something to the poor. He then, having received the sop, went immediately out, and it was night. So we now know that the day had begun. The new day, that is, which we understand now, is the Passover, the 14th of Abib. Okay? So let's move forward. Let's go to Marcos. Right? Now, we're going to go through, we're not going through the whole Passover ceremony because we looked at that when we were going through the Passover. We want to jump down to Marcos, which is Mark chapter 14, and starting at verse 32. When they left the house to go to the garden. And they came to a place which was named Gat Shamanim, or Gethsemane, which means, and I think this was very interesting to find out what the name of this place is. The name of Gat Shamanim, it means an oil press. And that's something else you can put a pin in. Got a lot of pens this evening for y'all, okay? And he says to his disciples, Sit you here while I shall pray. Now, one of the things that we don't get into, or we won't get into, is the details of their prayer, which we find in the writings of Yahuchanan or Yuchanan. But we're going to just touch on what we have here for today. We didn't want to get too far into all the details of the prayer. Our willing, we can revisit that another time. Okay? So he says, verse 33, And he takes with him Kepha and Yaakov and Yuchanan, and began to be sore amazed and to be very heavy, and says to them, My soul is exceeding sorrowful unto death. Tarry ye here and watch. And he went forward a little and fell on the ground and prayed that, if it were possible, the hour might pass from him. And he said, Abba, Abba, all things are possible to you. Take away this cup from me. Nevertheless, not what I will, what you will be done. Not my will, your will be done. Okay? And he comes and finds them sleeping. Now, just to explain, remember this is the nighttime. Typically during the night, we get sleepy, we get fatigued because 9 times out of 10, we will work it off the course of the daylight portion. Okay? When I say daylight portion, I should just say day. I don't want people to get confused. When it's the night, scripturally speaking, Passover had just begun. to be followed by the daylight portion. Okay, so when I said daylight portion, I'm talking about the daylight portion of the previous day, which would have been the 13th of Abib. Okay, keep that in mind. All right, verse 37. And he comes and finds them sleeping, and says to Kepha, Shimon, sleepest thou? Couldst not thou watch 1 hour? Watch ye and pray, lest ye enter into temptation. The spirit truly is ready, but the flesh is weak. And again he went away and prayed and spake the same words. And when he returned, he found them asleep again. For their eyes were heavy, neither wist they what to answer him. And he cometh the third time, and says unto them, Sleep on now, and take rest. It is enough. The hour is come. Behold, the Son of Man is betrayed into the hands of sinners. Rise up, let us go. Lo, he that betrayed me is at hand. Now, several events transpired at the arrest of Yahushua, right? One of the things that happened is that Yehuda, he betrayed him with a kiss. Kepha, he cuts a man ear off, and it ultimately leads to what we're about to get into, the different stops that were made throughout the course of the night. So once they arrested Yahushua, the first stop that we have here, right, in Yukonim, which is John once again, chapter 18, starting at verse 12, it says, Then the band and the captain and officers of the Yahudim, or Jews, took Yahushua and bound him, and led him away to Anan, okay, or Annas, for he was the father-in-law to Caiaphas, which was the high priest that same year. Now Caiaphas was he which gave counsel to the Yahudim that it was expedient that one man should die for the people. And it's interesting, prophetically speaking, that the high priest made such a statement. But let's move on. Let's drop down to verse 19, John chapter 18 still. Then the high priest then asked Yahushua of his disciples and of his doctrine. Now these little points right here that I'm highlighting as we go through, it's important because when it comes to the Yahudim during that day, two things that Yahushua said about them. One thing that he said was this. He said, if you believe in Moshe's writing, you will believe in me because Moshe wrote about me. Number one, they did not believe what Moshe wrote. The second thing that he said about them, he said, you have the Torah, but neither one of you obeys the Torah. So not only did they not believe what Moshe wrote, they didn't even obey what Moshe wrote. And I think it's important that we as Bible students and Bible believers can acknowledge that, because a lot of times when Yahushua was going against the scribes, the Pharisees, and the Sadducees, it was not because of what the Torah taught. It was because of rabbinical teachings that have now taken them away from doing what thus says Yahweh. A lot of people get things misconstrued, just like Brother Shaul, when he says, for example, he practiced the Jews' religion. And if you look up that term, Jews' religion, it specifically says Judaism in the Greek language, right? So he was acknowledging Judaism as being something separate and distinct from the ways of the Messiah, because he said that he counted all that he had before Judaism as dung for the knowledge of the Messiah. In other words, the Messiah's doctrine. Now the question is this: what was the Messiah's doctrine? It was the exact same thing that Abba gave through his servants, the prophets. The problem was this: our forefathers moved away from it, and they were not practicing everything that Abba had given. Okay, so keep that in mind. So, verse 19 again. The high priest then asked Yahushua of his disciples and of his doctrine. Yahushua answered him, I spoke openly to the world. I ever taught in the synagogue and in the temple, whither the Yahudim always resort. And in secret have I said nothing. In other words, everything that I teach, I spoke openly. I taught openly. why askest thou me? Ask them which heard me, what I have said to them. Behold, they know what I said. And when he had thus spoken, one of the officers which stood by struck Yahushua with the palm of his hand, saying, Answerest thou the high priest so? Yahushua answered him, If I have spoken evil, bear witness of the evil. But if well, why smitest thou me? Now Anan has sent him bound unto Caiaphas the high priest. So this is the second stop, going to see Caiaphas. So for this one, we're going to go to Matthew, which is Matthew, once again, chapter 26, starting at verse 57. And I'm just going to be doing some reading and again, highlighting different points as we come to it. And they that had laid hold on Yahushua led him away to Caiaphas the high priest, where the scribes and the elders were assembled. But Caiaphas followed him afar off unto the high priest's palace, and went in and sat with the servants to see the end. Now the chief priests and elders and all the council sought false witness against Yahushua to put him to death. Keep in mind, this is the leadership of Israel, and what are they doing? They are seeking false witnesses. Shema Israel. Pay attention. Verse 60. But found none. Yea, though many false witnesses came, yet found they none. At the last came 2 false witnesses, and said, This fellow said, I am able to destroy the temple of Elohim, and to build it in 3 days. And the high priest arose and said unto him, Answerest thou nothing? What is it which these witness against you? But Yahushua held his peace. Didn't say anything. And the high priest answered and said unto him, I adjure thee by the living mighty one, that you tell us whether you be the Messiah, the son of Elohim. Yahushua said unto him, Thou hast said. Nevertheless, I say to you, hereafter shall you see the Son of Man sitting on the right hand of power and coming in the clouds of heaven. Then the high priest rent his clothes, saying, He hath spoken blasphemy. What further need have we of witnesses? Behold, now ye have heard this blasphemy. What think ye? They answered and said, He is guilty of death. Then did they spit in his face and buffeted him. And others smote him with the palms of their hands, saying, Prophesy unto us, thou Messiah, who is he that smote thee? Now, can you just imagine, first of all, being smacked? Just imagine being in a scenario, you're surrounded by a variety of people, several people. And people are smacking you and they're spitting on you and they're punching you. Just imagine and keep that in mind, because this is the persecution that has just begun. Now, you come into the third step. It says in verse 28, Then they led Yahushua from Caiaphas to the hall of judgment, and it was early. And they themselves went not into the judgment hall, lest they should be defiled, but that they might eat the Passover. Pilate then went out unto them and said, What accusation bring you against this man? They answered and said to him, If he were not a malefactor, we would not have delivered him up to you. Then said Pilate to them, Take you him and judge him according to your law. The Yehudim therefore said to him, It is not lawful for us to put any man to death, that the saying of Yahushua might be fulfilled, which he spoke, signifying what death he should die. Right? Now we come into the fourth stop, right? It says, and we're going back to Lucas, which is Luke chapter 23 and verse 1 for this one. It says, The whole company of them rose up and brought him before Pilate. They began to accuse him, saying, We found this man perverting the nation. forbidding paying taxes to Caesar and saying that he himself is Messiah, a king. Pilate asked him, "Are you the king of the Yahudim?" He answered him, "So you say." Pilate said to the chief priests and the multitude, "I find no basis for a charge against this man." But they insisted, saying, "He stirs up the people, teaching throughout all Yahudah, beginning from Galilee even to this place." But when Pilate heard Galilee mentioned, he asked if the man was a Galilean. When he found out that he was in Herod's jurisdiction, he sent him to Herod, who was also in Jerusalem during those days. Now when Herod saw Yahushua, he was exceedingly glad, for he had wanted to see him for a long time, because he had heard many things about him. He had hoped to see some miracle done by him. He questioned him with many words, but he gave no answers. The chief priests and the scribes stood, vehemently accusing him. Herod with his soldiers humiliated him and mocked him, dressing him in luxurious clothing. They sent him back to Pilate. So now he went back to Pilate, okay? Now, keep in mind, all of this is going on as it is during the night. Let's go to Yochanan once again. John chapter 19, picking up in verse 1. Then Pilate therefore took Yahushua and scourged him. And the soldiers platted a crown of thorns and put it on his head, and they put on him a purple robe. Now, this is also something that's very significant. I want to just call your mind back to something, okay? Call your mind back to something. We read a passage in Genesis chapter 22. This was the Akedah, which is the binding of Isaac, right? One of the highlights of that passage is the fact that the word "the lamb" was used, right? And it was used twice. Now it was highlighted because the way that that word was formed, the term wasn't used again until the Passover was given, which is an indication by way of comparing, because of the word formation, that the lamb that Abraham was telling Isaac Yahweh would provide for himself was that Passover lamb. But then later on, the scripture says that Abraham was shown a ram with his head caught in a thicket. That was imagery. So hold up, brother. The ram, which was it? The fact that the ram was caught in the thicket by his head, it is something that is pointing to, it is hinting to the fact that they were going to put the thorns on Yahushua's head. They crowned him and they were calling him king. Now, even though they did this in mockery, what they didn't realize, he was and is the king. Verse 3, John chapter 19. And said, "Hail, King of the Yahudim." And they smote him with their hand. Now, all this is still going on. Now, if you ever had any experience dealing with rose bushes, okay? I had rose bushes before. I had to pull the weeds out of them and things like that, you know. Sometimes those thorns, they catch you, they can hurt, you know. But just imagine now somebody intentionally pushing these thorns into your head, and they're penetrating and they're sticking in there. So now you got blood coming all down. You know, if you ever had a sore or an open cut wound and you were sweating, right? And the sweat gets into that wound, how it stings. And I want to paint that picture. I think one of the best movies that really portrayed the persecution of the Messiah was Passion of the Christ, done by Mel Gibson. Very brutal, but that's the closest that they came to depicting what actually happened. And up to this date, there's neither one of these movies that depict the life of the Messiah have depicted them having pulled the the hair out of his beard. None of them depicted that, but prophetically, that's something that was supposed to happen. Now, if you just had to pick, sometimes if you had to pull like a hair out of your nose or something, that stings if you had to do that. And can you imagine somebody grabbing a handful of your hair and just pulling it out of your scalp? I mean, and I really want to emphasize all the persecution, all of this torture that the Messiah went through. Because all of that happened for us. Remember, he was the sacrifice, that Passover sacrifice for us. Okay? Let's keep it moving. He says, verse 3 again, and said, Hail, King of the Yahudim, and they smote him with their hands. Pilate therefore went forth again, and said to them, Behold, I bring him forth to you, that you may know that I find no fault in him. Pilate keeps saying, this man is innocent, basically. Then came Yahushua forth, wearing the crown of thorns and the purple robe, and says to them, Behold the man. When the chief priests therefore and officers saw him, they cried out, saying, Crucify him! Crucify him! In other words, kill him! Kill him! Think about that. Pilate says to them, Take him and crucify, for I found no fault in him. Then the Yahudim answered, We have a law, and by our law he ought to die, because he made himself the son of Elohim. Hold on to that. That's another one. Put a pin in it. They wanted to kill him because in their eyes he blasphemed and made himself the son of Elohim. Think about that. When Pilate therefore heard that saying, he was more afraid, and went again into the judgment hall, and said to Yahushua, Whence art thou? But Yahushua gave him no answer. Then Pilate said to him, Speakest thou not unto me? Knowest thou not that I have power to crucify you, and have power to release you? Yahushua answered, You could have no power against me, except it were given you from above. Therefore, he that delivered me unto you hath the greater sin. And from henceforth Pilate sought to release him, but the Yahudim cried out, saying, If you let this man go, you are not Caesar's friend. Whosoever maketh himself a king speaks against Caesar. When Pilate therefore heard that saying, he brought Yahushua forth and sat down in the judgment seat, in a place that is called the pavement, but in Hebrew, Gabbatha. And it was the preparation of the Passover. Now, the 14th of Abib. Why is that called the preparation of the Passover? Okay. Now, as was mentioned before, the Passover and unleavened bread they're not the same as we've been through, but because of the season and because it's an 8-day period, they often group them together. So the preparation of the Passover was the time frame. This is like the last day you got before making sure all of the leaven is removed from your house for 7 days. Because remember, throughout the 7 days of unleavened bread, we can't have any leaven or leavened products in our homes. So you're preparing for that by making sure all of that is gone. Okay? So it says, and it was the preparation of the Passover. And about the 6th hour, now I'm going to start getting into some more details, because they done went through the nighttime. He done went to this stop. He done went to that stop. He done went to this stop. He went back to Pilate. And about the 6th hour, he said unto the Yahudim, Behold your king. But they cried out, Away with him! Away with him! Crucify him! Pilate said unto them, Shall I crucify your king? The chief priest answered, and listen to this. Listen to what they say. We have no king but Caesar. That's our forefathers. If you are an Israelite today, That is what our forefathers proclaimed. Now keep that in mind, because guess what? That's part of the reason why we are in the diaspora today. They pledged their loyalty to Caesar. Who was Caesar? Caesar was the king of Rome, the emperor. See? Shema Israel. Shema. So right now, we're going to move forward to another passage in Marcos, which is Mark chapter 15. And let's pick up in verse 21. So what's going to be happening here? They done tortured him. They've been spitting on him. They've been beating him. They put on him the crown of thorns. They put the robe and the clothing on him. They were making fun of him. They were doing all these things, right? Now comes the time when the crucifixion is going to happen. Another thing that happened as far as the releasing of the two, I didn't want to get into that one either because I didn't want to take up too much more time. But there was Barabbas, or Bar Abba, right? And it was Bar Abba and Yahusha. And he asked, which do you want released? Now keep in mind, Bar Abba is Aramaic. And with that term, Bar, it means son. And of course, Abba, father. Son of the Father, right? Bar Abba, son of the Father. So in place of the son of the Father, they chose Yahusha, the innocent one. You have two men. There's a choice being made. The choice is between two. One of them is Yahusha and the other one is Bar Abba. He was the guilty one. He was the known criminal. But they said, crucify the innocent one. Shema Israel. Shema. Okay? We're going to touch on the significance and what that points to. Okay? Not today, but as we go through some other things. All right? But keep that in mind. Hit another one. Put a pin in that. Okay? So now, Mark chapter 15, verse 21. And they compelled one Shimon, a Cyrenian who passed by, coming out of the country, the father of Alexander and Rufus, to bear his cross, which is actually a tree. It wasn't a cross, it was a tree. He was actually opposed to all the pictures that you see with the Messiah being executed and his arms are out this way. That's not how that happened. His arms were actually above his head. Now, we learned this years ago. Just hold your arms above your head. And just holding your arms above your head, you find that sometimes your breathing is a little strained because it's in an awkward position. This was part of the torture. If you put your arm down to your side, your breathing is pretty much normal. But if they're above your head, it's labored. And that's how he was. He wasn't on a cross. He was on a stake.